Okay, so we're starting, we're not going to finish it. If we do go anything like my first class, we're not going to finish it. Hawthorne's Minister's Black Veil, which we will finish, which day today? Today's Wednesday. We will finish Friday, so go ahead and read. I think I'd mentioned possibly reading it for today. Go ahead and read the intro to William Faulkner and Faulkner's Barn Burning also for Friday. We won't finish it on Friday. We're going to be behind already today. So, Minister's Black Veil, written in 1836. You've got biographical information about Hawthorne in the first set of pages in your book. I'm not going to discuss that. We get a subtitle, a parable. And the parable has a little circle beside it, which indicates there's a footnote. Okay? The end of the footnote tells us this is Hawthorne's note. This isn't the editor's. And the note reads, another clergyman in New England, Mr. Joseph Moody of York, Maine, who died about 80 years since, that would be 1756, made himself remarkable by the same eccentricity that is here related of the Reverend Mr. Hooper. In his case, however, that is in this Mr. Moody's case, the symbol had a different import. That is, the veil he puts on has a different meaning. In early life, he had accidentally killed a beloved friend. And from that day till his own death, till the hour of his own death, he hid his face from men. Okay? So this guy that the note refers to accidentally killed a friend, and from that moment on, covered his face with a veil. Okay? What point do footnotes usually serve? Why do authors include footnotes? If you have to write a paper for a class, what's the purpose of a footnote? There's a couple of reasons. One, you might be citing something, so you give the bibliographical information. Two, it's additional information. You're adding something to it. Wilkerson or Bacon?
Bacon.
Bacon. You're adding information. But that information that's added, we usually take to be what? True or false? Do we take it to be true or false? Do we take it to be fiction or real? Usually we take it to be real. It's not false. With Hawthorne, you can never make that assumption. Okay? How many of you had to read the Scarlet Letter, like in high school? Anybody? One. Scarlet Letter begins with a chapter. It's been decades since I read the Scarlet Letter. I think called The Custom House. Hawthorne worked for a while in a custom house in Massachusetts. And in that introductory kind of chapter, it's like a prologue or preface, the narrator tells us how he came upon this story. He was doing some stuff and he finds a manuscript. The manuscript is the story, The Scarlet Letter. J.R.R. Tolkien does the exact same thing, by the way, with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit kind of a thing. Okay? Other authors do it too. But Hawthorne, when you read Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne wants you to believe that the person narrating the story actually did find this manuscript that tells the events behind the Scarlet Letter. It's all part of the fiction. None of that's true. Okay? It's very possible. I've never done a genealogical search to find out if there was a Mr. Moody of York, Maine, who died in 1756. But it's entirely possible, I would say, in fact, it is more than likely probable that this is all part of Hawthorne's fiction here. Okay? The subtitle is A Parable. What's a parable? Who famously told parables? Jesus. Walks around from town to town, people come to him, he heals them, and he talks largely in parables. Notice if you go back and read the Gospels, very often does Jesus, quote unquote, preach. Sermon on the Mount. It's a sermon on a mountain. Most of the time, he tells stories. Take that back. He tells parables. What's the difference between a parable and any other story? Are the Harry Potter stories parables? I would argue, yes, they actually are. Okay? Another question. If any of you have read any of the gospel accounts, are Jesus' parables clear? That is, when Jesus tells a parable to the disciples, and the disciples are not just the 12 apostles, they're all of Jesus' followers. At points, he had 4,000, 5,000 people following him around, literally going from one place to another place. That's why he has the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000, etc. Okay? When he tells these parables, he often begins with an introductory phrase or ends with a concluding phrase. Anybody know what that is? Let him who has ears to hear, hear. Let those who have eyes to see, see. And even the phrase is enigmatic. Because what does he mean? Not everybody has ears to hear. We all have ears, but some people hear better than others. And I don't mean hear better, like you guys probably hear better than me. I've got hearing aids in right now because I've lost some high notes, low notes. Not that kind of hearing. What's he mean by hearing and seeing? Perceiving, understanding. Let those who have ears to perceive, understand, hear. Let those who have eyes to see, we even use the phrase, oh, I see. And what do we mean? I understand. Okay? And then he tells the parable. And in the vast majority of times, after he tells the parable, a little while later, and we're told something like, a little while later, Jesus was alone with what become the apostles, the 12. And they're like, Jesus, dude, what do you mean? What do you mean about the seed scattered on the rocky road, scattered on the, barely fertile ground and scattered on the very fertile ground, and it grows up immediately, dies, it grows up, it gets choked out by weeds, it grows up, the weeds get pulled and produces great. And Jesus says, to you it has been given to understand. In other words, I will explain the parables to you. And they're like, why don't you do that to the others? Because it's not been given to them. In other words, they don't have ears to hear. What's my point? Is a parable, as it is usually understood, is a parable a story told to make something clear? No. It's a story told to reveal a truth, but you have to be in the right, perspective, the right state of mind, the right receptivity to understand the story. It'd be like if I was speaking to you through a transmitter of some kind, and you weren't here physically, say it was back pandemic, but we didn't have Zoom. Instead, I would broadcast like a radio, and you each had your own receivers. Well, if you could not tune in to the correct signal, you wouldn't get everything. All right? So the purpose of a parable is to tell a story with a point, but you've got to be in the right position to understand the point. In other words, it's not told to everyone. All right? And go back to Jesus for a moment. Jesus is not a great universal teacher. He's not saying what he says so everybody can hear it. He says it so that those who have ears to hear can hear it. Okay? So, all that's to get to. The minister's black veil, a parable. What's Hawthorne telling us? It's not meant for everybody. You gotta work at understanding it. It's not like an Aesop's fable. An Aesop's fable is pretty clear. Everybody can understand those. You know, the fable of the ant and the grasshopper. The ant works and works and works and works and works, and it stores up food for the winter. The grasshopper is like, hey man, eat, live, and be merry. I mean, drink and have a good time. I can always do that later. And then winter comes, the grasshopper has no food, and it's like, sucks to be you. Okay? That's pretty clear all the time. So the parable begins. The sexton stood in the porch of Milford Meeting House, pulling lustily at the bell rope. So what's our setting? Are we given a time frame? Are we told in 1756? No, we're not. But we do get a location. The town's name is Milford. We're not given a state. I think later on it's implied it's Massachusetts, because the other nearby town is Westbury, which is a town in Massachusetts. Okay? We're also given a time setting partially, not by reference to a date, but by reference to a kind of a physical description of something. Where is the sexton pulling the rope? It's on the porch of what building? The meeting house. What's another word for the meeting house? We find not because it's used, but because of the description of what happens in this meeting house. It's a church. Okay? And because he's a sexton. A sexton is a specific title for someone who takes care of a church building and its grounds. He has certain tasks. One of his tasks is to ring the bell. Okay? So he's ringing the bell, and we're told the old people of the village came stooping along the street. Why are they stooping? Because they're old. This isn't old 40 or 50. This is old 60s and 70s. They're not in as good a shape as they used to be, so they're kind of hunched over, looking at the ground. Meanwhile, the children were told, do what? They trip merrily beside their parents. It's like they're skipping, full of life, full of energy. Or they mimic the old people. They kind of do this. We're told that some do both. What else? Spruce bachelors look sidelong at the pretty maidens. What does it mean, spruce? They're decked out. These guys are dressed nice for church. Why? Because of the pretty maidens. And they're looking sideways at them. They're not looking at them, giving catcalls and whistling as they're making their way. They're checking them out, though. And fancied that the Sabbath sunshine made them, the young ladies, prettier than on weekdays. When the throng had mostly streamed into the into the porch, the sexton began to toll the bell. So the people make their way, they get onto the porch, the outside kind of entrance of the building, has a covering over it. And at that point, the sexton starts tolling the bell. What's the difference between tolling the bell and lustily pulling the bell? You got a bell and it's ringing, right? Two different purposes. When he first is lustily pulling the bell, it's boom, 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 constant. What's the purpose for ringing that bell? Okay, this isn't a town the size of Murfreesboro. This isn't Nashville. This is a small town, 100, 200, maybe 300 people. Everybody lives in a fairly restricted or fairly enclosed area. It's not all spread out. The ringing of that bell, it's a signal. It's, all right, folks, time to start making your way to church. Part of the cultural setting, everybody goes to church. Okay? That's the lustily pulling of the bell. And then he stops as he sees people making their way. It's done its job. And when they start to arrive at the church, he starts tolling the bell. To toll is to count. Boom, boom, boom. There's a set pace. Okay? The tolling indicates we're getting closer. It's almost time. And as he tolls the bell, he looks towards the parsonage, the home where the parson lives. Small towns, even today, a lot of small towns in America, preacher at a church, pastor, whatever at a church, will have what's called a parsonage. And that's housing given by the church community. The pastor doesn't own it. The pastor can use it as long as the pastor is the pastor of that church. Okay? He's keeping his eye on the reverend's door because once the reverend, Parson Hooper, steps out the door, the tolling stops. That's an indicator to the people that are still making their way, as well as to the people that are already in the church. All right, he's coming. Everybody needs to take their seats. They need to get ready. Church is getting ready to begin. And I should mention, back to the first line, meeting house. What branch of Christianity uses that kind of language to describe a church building? Anybody know? Quakers. What's called the Society of Friends. They don't refer to the building as a church. It's a meeting house because that's where they have their meeting. And in a typical Quaker ceremony, you don't have a sermon. You don't have singing. It's just everybody comes in and they sit down quietly and they wait for the Spirit to move them. And then someone will stand up and share something. And sit back down and somebody else will. And after a period of time, 30 minutes, an hour, if nobody else says anything, then they quietly get up and leave. I'm not saying that that means this is a Quaker church. It's clearly not, because you have the reading of the Psalms, you have singing, you have a sermon. Okay? So, Parson Hooper starts making his way, and the sexton says, "But what has good Parson Hooper got upon his face?" And we're not told, said the sexton. He cries it. This is a loud exclamation. Put it in 2024 language, what the hell is he wearing? So that everybody milling around on the porch and just inside in the vestibule, so to speak, of the church, they hear him, and they all turn and look to the parson. And they immediately turn about and beheld the semblance of Mr. Hooper pacing slowly his meditative way towards the meeting house. Why does he pace slowly his meditative way? What's it mean, his meditative way? Notice he's not in a rush. He hasn't just, gotten dressed at the last minute. He's prepared. But he's just taking his own time. Meditative way tells us his mind is preoccupied. It's probably, preaching's a lot like teaching. He's probably thinking what he's going to say, going over it in his mind. He might be thinking about something else. How do I explain this? Might be thinking about, why did I put this on? They see him making his way. With one accord, they started. What does that mean, with one accord? During the Trump administration negotiated what are called the Abraham Accords with several Middle Eastern countries. bringing peace between Israel and Qatar and United Arab Emirates and a couple other countries. What does it mean, an accord? Literally, it's to heart. Ak means to. Cord, card. Cardiac, cardio. Coeur from French. Heart, Richard Coeur de Lion. Richard, heart of the lion, Richard the Lionheart. With one heart that is in total agreement, they turn and do what? Lost my place. With one accord, they start. They started. That is, they jump. They're astonished. The word astonished comes from Old English, the language spoken in what is today Britain from around 500 AD to about 1100 AD. Right? Astonished means literally to be turned to stone. It's to be frozen. These people see him and they all jump. Put yourself in their shoes. Expressing more wonder than if some strange minister were coming to dust the cushions. Goodman Gray. It's another indication of the time frame. People weren't called goodmen after the late 1700s, like 1800 or so. Generally, they weren't referring to each other as Goodman Gray or good woman or, something like that. It's a Puritan term. So this is set in the early to mid, probably 18th century, 1700 to 1770s. Goodman Gray, are you sure it's our parson? Good question, right? How do they know it is? Can they see his face? No. They can see his physical shape. They can see the way he walks. We can recognize people that we've known for a long time by the way they walk, by their body shape, how they carry themselves. The sexton, of course it's Mr. Hooper. He was to have exchanged pulpits with Parson Shute of Westbury. That is, he wasn't supposed to be here today. But Parson Shute notified us yesterday that he had a sudden funeral to attend to. Somebody in his parish died and had to be buried. Okay? So Parson Hooper was stuck. The cause of so much amazement may appear sufficiently slight. Mr. Hooper, a gentlemanly person of about 30, though still a bachelor. Notice that, though still a bachelor. What does that language kind of betray on the part of the narrator? And it's the word still. He's 30 and he isn't married yet? Come on, Still a bachelor, was dressed with due clerical neatness. That is, he's dressed appropriate to his rank as a minister. As if a careful wife had starched his band and brushed the weekly dust from his Sunday's garb. So even if you didn't catch the part about being a bachelor, as though he had a wife, is telling us he doesn't have a wife. One little difference between how he normally dresses, though. Swathed about his forehead and hanging down over his face so low as to be shaken by his breath, Mr. Hooper had on a black veil. Okay. I'm going to draw what I think is a problem in how Hawthorne crafted his story. It says, swathed about his face and down so low as to be moved by his breath. So how low down is that? The reason I'm asking is in the next sentence he's going to say it doesn't cover his mouth. But if I were to just put this over my nose like that, so you can still see my mouth, even when I breathe in and out through my nose, it's not going to move. The only way you're going to move that veil is by breath coming out of the mouth. And yet we're told when he speaks and such, the veil moves. So the description should be that it covers down to his mouth. Anyways, so he's got this black veil on. All right? Mr. Hooper had on a black veil. On a nearer view, it seemed to consist of two folds of crepe. Crepe, very thin material, fold it over to make it just slightly thicker, and it's black, which entirely conceal his features, except the mouth and chin. So, forehead to, like, here. But probably did not intercept his sight, farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. Notice, probably did not. What does that mean, to intercept his sight? To come between. So, when he has this veil on, not when, because he does all the time now, what are we being told? Like I can through this, even though it's not black, I can still make out your shapes. I can see desks, I can see chairs, the windows, all of that. I can't make out your face, but your body's inside. And the farther away you are, the little harder it is to see. He can still see them. All right? Farther than to give a darkened aspect. So everything now is darkened. We're going to see a bunch of words that are tied to, related to, emblematic of, echo, things like gloomy, shade, dark, darkened, darkly, shadow, obscure, hiding, hidden, black. They all indicate what? Something that's not seen clearly, or something that's not very clear. All right? Just pay attention to those kinds of words. When an author uses language like that repeatedly, emphasizing it, maybe little nuances, like the difference between darkly and dark and darkened, all right? That author's telling us, this is important. Farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things, with this gloomy shade before him. What does gloomy mean today? Okay. If somebody's described as being gloomy, what does that mean? Generally, kind of, they're a little sad. They're moody. There's something going on. They're down. Okay? This gloomy shade means in the gloom. What is that? We don't use that word gloom at all anymore. It's an old English word. It died out a couple hundred years ago. We only use gloomy. It means darkened, off in the shadows. In this gloomy, darkened, off in the shadows shade. In the shadowy shade. In this darkened darkness. Get the idea that he's emphasizing this. Okay? With this gloomy shade before him, but the gloomy here also has this, emotional aspect of sadness. Good Mr. Hooper walked onward at a slow and quiet pace, stooping somewhat, looking on the ground as is customary with abstracted men. He doesn't walk how? He doesn't walk like a Marine. Head up, shoulders back, chest out, just deliberative. He's walking out, head down, and because his head is down, what's the rest of his body doing? Watch people, and you'll notice this. If somebody walks constantly with their head down, their shoulders tend to roll forward, and their body tends to bend forward. Okay? Your body follows your sight, so you kind of do this. And he's walking slowly, we're told. Why? Because he is like all abstracted men. His mind is elsewhere. Okay? Stooping somewhat, looking on the ground as is customary with abstracted men, yet nodding kindly to those of his parishioners who still waited on the meeting house steps. He gets to the steps, and there are people waiting there, and he nods to them on either side. Notice, he's not so distracted that he doesn't see anybody, that he doesn't pay attention to anybody. What does he do? Why does he nod to them? What's it mean to nod to somebody? I've got colleagues in the department, because we have wildly differing political beliefs and stuff, who literally won't say hello. They won't even nod. Right? I say hello to everybody. Say hello to people I don't know. I see somebody with beautiful hair, I go, man, you've got gorgeous hair. Sometimes it's appropriate, whatever. Anyways, he's acknowledging them. He's saying you're, not literally saying, but by nodding to them, he's saying you're important. You're there. What do they not do in return? What's the appropriate thing to do? If someone says hello, you say hello. You don't just turn the other way and walk away. That's rude. They don't acknowledge him. But so wonderstruck were they that his greeting hardly met with a return. Now notice our narrator gives them an excuse. He doesn't say, but so hard-hearted were they, but so focused on their own problem. No, it's their wonderstruck. That is, they're astonished. They can't move. What's going on? Okay? The sexton can't really feel as if good Mr. Hooper's face was behind that piece of crepe. Think about that for a moment. He can't feel as if the person's face is behind the crepe. Okay. Play with this for a minute. If his face isn't behind the crepe, then what is? What kind of reaction is that on the sexton's part? Totally irrational. I mean, out of the blue, beyond the universe, out of odd. If his face isn't there, this is not Stranger Things, folks. This is something ultimately very weird. An old woman, I don't like it. He's changed himself into something awful only by hiding his face. By hiding his face, Parson Hooper has become something awful. But Hawthorne probably means, I did not say this to my first class, Hawthorne probably means awful in its original meaning, full of awe. Okay? Anybody know an Old Testament character who had to put on a veil? It's in the first 5 books. Exodus. Moses. Anybody know why Moses had to put on a veil? When he went up on Mount Sinai and met God, and Moses says, let me see your face. God says, no man living can see my face. But you hide in that cleft of the rock, and I'll go by you, and I'll put my hand over you, and I'll walk by it, and you can see my backside. That is the glory, my glory from the back. All right? After Moses is up there for 40 days and nights, he comes down, and we get this description that his face shines. Not shines like a flashlight reflecting off it, shining from within. And the people are like, put a veil on, cover it. We can't see you like this, okay? Why? Because his face was awful to behold. He was reflecting the glory of God, according to traditional interpretation of those passages. Is that what's going on here? We don't know. We don't get any indication, there's not any light escaping behind or outside the veil. But he becomes something awful by what? Hiding his face. Anybody know what the greatest blessing is? throughout the Old Testament. It becomes a blessing used. St. Paul writes, uses it a couple times in the New Testament. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. What does that mean? That light comes out of God's face? No. It's may the Lord look, not going to be personal anybody, look at you. May his face be to you like this. Why? That's an act of blessing. Not even doing anything. Just looking at you is an act of blessing. That's God saying, you are. All right? The flip side of that is the worst curse you can have. May God turn his face against you. Christ on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? What does it mean when you forsake someone? You turn away from them. You show them your back. It's the greatest kind of disrespect. It means essentially, you're a speck. Go away. Okay? She's in awe over the parson. Goodman Gray, our parson has gone mad. So we have three different reactions, and each of the three different reactions are equally what? Are they appropriate to the situation? If I were to come in class Friday wearing a black veil, would you immediately assume Sherman doesn't have a face anymore? Sherman's gone totally crazy. There's a 1970s, I think it was, psychology professor did an experiment with his students. Let me rephrase that. On his students. They weren't aware of what he was doing. And he came into class with a brown paper bag. First day of class, entire semester. Just wore a brown paper bag over his head. They never saw his face. And students dropped, students complained. And it was all about, if I remember correctly, all about, both projection on the part of the students and acceptance. About accepting difference. We're not all the same, obviously, okay? So, the parson is still just on the meeting house steps. But as he makes his way and people start turning and seeing, they start talking. And rumor personified, rumor kind of spreads into the meeting house and goes from the pews in the back of the building up to the front of the building. So that as he starts coming up the steps and entering the porch, everybody inside the building has now turned to look at him. And they're all, and people are moving around because they're uneasy and such. Okay? Some stand up to get a good look at him, and we're told. And he comes in, he walks down that central aisle, pews on either side, and he nods on both sides. Again, acknowledging his parishioners. And then he gets to the place where the oldest member of the parish, some old geezer, sits, and he bows to that guy. Why? Age should be venerated. Age should be respected. Respect your elders. And the old guy kind of looks at him, doesn't totally understand what's happening. Doesn't totally perceive at that point the difference in Parson Hooper. And we're told that long paragraph at the beginning, page 332, towards the second half of it. It's only when Parson Hooper ascends the steps up to the area where an altar would be and such, where the pulpit is, and gets up into the pulpit and turns and, listen to the language, faces the congregation. What's the important about faces? This. Okay? And faces the congregation, that the old guy now realizes the difference. He can't see Parson Hooper's face. And we're told He seemed not fully to partake of the prevailing wonder till Mr. Hooper had ascended the stairs and showed himself in the pulpit face to face with his congregation. What's the problem? He's not face to face. Their faces are all there, but what do they see? Black cloth. They don't see his face, except for the black veil. That mysterious emblem was never once withdrawn. Mysterious emblem. Mysterious from mystery. What's a mystery? Somebody define the word mystery. Can a mystery be solved? Is a mystery like a problem to be solved? Unifying Einsteinian physics with quantum theory. That's a problem. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, it doesn't work. Quantum physics does not account for Einstein. Einstein doesn't account for quantum physics. There's a huge problem between those two. Okay? Hubble telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope. According to the Hubble telescope, theories of cosmology and everything had Big Bang, all that, at one point in time, and galaxies formed at certain intervals, etc., etc. And according to the James Webb telescope, all those theories about the formation of galaxies, they're all wrong. Because the earliest, the farthest back image we see what are called adult, fully formed, fully grown spiral galaxies. According to the cosmology of 20 years ago, couldn't be. There's a problem. Scientists are like, how do we resolve this? A mystery, literally, is something that cannot be resolved, or something that cannot be explained. It is inexplicable. We don't like to have mysteries. We like to be able to solve all our problems. Here's two of the greatest mysteries, so to speak, within the Christian tradition. That's largely, once you get to the root matter of mysteries, you're in the realm of religion. You're in the realm of philosophy, speculation. Okay? The Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity, according to the traditional Christian church. One God, three persons. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. How? How can one be three and three be one? One is one and three, verb, are three. You don't say, and three are one. One, you can't say one is three. Why? Because there's an agreement issue there. Explain it. Incarnation, Christmas, just added. How does the God that created everything, the God that is outside of the universe, outside time and space, omniscient, all-powerful, everywhere present, become we don't know the exact size, but 8-pound, 19-inch little baby? You can't reason that all the way through. At some point, you are left with what? Faith. You just have to believe it. You can have certain facts, figures, etc., that get you so far, and from that point, it's jump off into the deep end or don't believe. Okay? That's mysteries. So this mysterious, unresolvable, inexplicable emblem. What's an emblem? See, in my first class, I got an awful lot of athletes, and they're all wearing pretty much the same stuff. It's got MTSU and then swoosh, Nike. What's the Nike emblem mean? Don't think of the commercials, because the commercials give us a phrase. Commercials say, just do it. Just do what? The emblem and the name Nike go back to an ancient Greek goddess of victory. The swoosh means, supposedly, if you put this emblem on you, on your clothes, on your shoes, on your helmet, whatever, you will be what? According to advertising, you'll be victorious. You'll be the conqueror. You'll be the winner. You'll be the hero. Okay? An emblem is an image that conveys an idea, conveys a story. Go into an Orthodox church. Go into a ruined church or monastery, something over in England that survives from the Middle Ages where the images haven't been destroyed. And you'll see in those buildings icons everywhere. Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Nashville, St. Ignatius I'm Orthodox, over in Franklin. There's images all on the wall. Why? Because they tell stories. And originally, at least in England, these were designed because people weren't literate. And they didn't have the Bible in their own language. So you could go and see this image, and if the priest was literate, the priest would tell you what the image means. So that you could build up your faith, etc., like that. So the emblem conveys an idea. This emblem, however, we're told, is mysterious. So what idea does it convey? They haven't the foggiest notion of what it means. That's what it conveys. No, it's not clear to any of the people. Remember what parables do and don't do. Okay? You have to have ears to hear and eyes to see. It shakes with his measured breath as he gave out the psalm. Why? If it's not going down to over his mouth, it shouldn't move. Unless he's wildly moving around and gesticulating, which, with what I know of 18th century Puritan New England, he's not. All right? What else? It threw its obscurity, that's obscure, not obscene, it threw its obscurity between him and the holy page. You know, it's like this. So when he looks down and reads, the Bible's here. That's an interesting little line. Because what's it telling us? It makes it harder to see, quote unquote, God's word. Makes it harder to understand. Makes it harder to read. Okay? And while he prayed, the veil lay heavily on his uplifted countenance. Notice he doesn't pray like, you can go to some churches today and, let's all bow our heads and pray. So you look down like this, maybe have your hand. He's praying like this and probably like this. Hands upheld. Why? Open to God and speaking to God. The veil lay heavily on his uplifted countenance. Did he seek to hide it, that is his face, from the dread being whom he was addressing? The dread being, the fearsome existing one, Such was the effect of this simple piece of crepe that more than one woman of delicate nerves was forced to leave the meeting house. And she rushes out. More than one. Okay? And then we're told about his life as a preacher. He's a good preacher. He's not a great preacher. He's not a poor preacher. He gets his message across. And his message, we're told, is usually to gently exhort souls to salvation. He's not a fire and brimstone. He's not, if you don't do what I say to do, you're going to burn in hell. It's just, follow the teachings of Jesus and be nice to each other, etc., etc. But this time, when he preaches, it's different. There is something about 6 or 7 lines down in that paragraph, something either in the sentiment of the discourse itself or in the imagination of the auditors. So either in not the words, okay, but the emotion conveyed in what he says, or in the minds of the people hearing it. Their imaginations, which made it greatly the most powerful effort they had ever heard from their pastor's lips. You might need to get to a certain age, I don't know, But there have been speeches in my life that I can remember, politicians and others, that listening or watching that speech was like an electric thrill. Because you kind of knew, this is major. This isn't something that's going to happen again. Okay? I was alive. I wasn't there because I was 2 years old or whatever. MLK Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Watch it. Get on YouTube. And it's electrifying. Hundreds of thousands of people there. Okay? Some of the addresses of FDR during the Great Depression, Second World War, JFK. Okay? I even get this experience if I read, when I read, which I usually do about once a year, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which is often regarded as the greatest speech in American history. Usually followed by Washington's farewell address. All right? There's something, either in the sentiment or in the hearers, that makes this the most powerful sermon he's ever delivered. And we're told it was tinged rather more darkly than usual with the gentle gloom of Mr. Hooper's temperament. Okay? His temperament. Notice we're told his temperament has a gentle gloom to it. It's soft, it's warm, it's cuddly, but it's kind of depressing. He's not the kind of guy that looks at a glass and says, it's half full. He says it's half empty. He's the kind of guy who looks at a beautiful ray of sun shining out from behind a cloud, who doesn't say, look at that glorious sunlight. He says, look at the cloud. As a friend of mine used to say, for every silver lining, there's a dark cloud. But we're told this one is tinged rather more darkly than usual. What do you do when you tinge something? You slightly discolor it. If you take a gallon of white paint and drop a drop of any color in it, what have you just done to that paint? You've tinged it. It may be very, very slight, but it's no longer 100% white. Gallon of yellow paint, you put any other color. You tinge it. The subject had reference to secret sin and those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest and would fain conceal from our own consciousness, even forgetting that the omniscient can detect them. Secret sin. Notice what he says. The things, those sad mysteries that we hide from our nearest and dearest, and what? Those things that we try to hide from our own consciousness and pretend to hide from God. Okay, God, I confess I did. But I'm not going to tell you about this one. You can't. This one's mine. I'm keeping it. As if you can hide something from God, right? All-seeing, all-knowing. And each member of the congregation, we're told, and I'm going to stop with this, from the youngest to the most hardened, like criminal in the congregation, felt like the person came up, snuck up behind him, tapped him on the shoulder and went, boom. I see you. I know what you're hiding. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you like for someone to come up and go, I know what you did? When it's only you who knows. Yeah, so people are, going out, fainting, etc. All right? 10:06. We'll stop there. Didn't get you quite as far as my first class. We'll finish this on Friday. We'll start barn burning. The extra credit quiz will be live, I think it's tomorrow. And you've got 3 or 4 days to take it.